Hello and welcome to Movie Film Studio, a film podcast where we unravel and re-ravel the best that Hollywood has to offer. I'm Isaac.
And I'm AJ.
And this week we took a look at the Ghostbusters, the 2016 remake of the 1984 classic.
Yes, indeed. Directed by Paul Feig.
And starring Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig.
And the rest of SNL.
And the rest of SNL. But before we get too deeply into that, let's go to this week in trailers and have a look at some of the new trailers that have come out over the last week. We might want to start with Jumanji Watch, which is a recurring feature. Is there any Jumanji news, AJ?
No.
All right, so what trailers did we watch instead?
So this week we watched the latest from the director of Ex Machina, Annihilation, based on the novel Annihilation.
Is it called? I
don't know, actually.
It might be called something different, but it is based on the best-selling novel,
Yes.
as the title cards in the trailer would have us believe.
Yep. And this is a science fiction horror, I guess.
Sure.
Starring Natalie Portman. Not discount Natalie.
Not discount, full price.
Natalie Portman and full-priced Oscar Isaac.
Exactly.
And it's... I'm not sure really what's happening in the trailer, but it seems like nature is doing some weird things.
It's the first look that we get at the trailer. Normally they don't give too much away. It's lots of very sort of snippets, cuts and pieces. But you're right, it looks very futuristic.
Ominous, mysterious.
Almost like there's a alien force which is invaded and is subtly changing the world around it. And people have gone to investigate this force in the jungle somewhere or the forest, and things have happened to them, things are happening to the world around them. We don't get too much story. There's just some sort of relationship between
something
Natalie
about
Portman
nature
and Oscar Isaac.
Stops Natalie Portman from answering questions as well. She can't answer
she doesn't
anything.
know.
She knows nothing.
Was it made of carbon? I don't know.
No.
Did you communicate with it? I don't know.
It noticed me.
Yeah.
There's deer. There's like deer in there with
flowers on their antlers.
And then Oscar Isaac and Natalie Portman seem to get it on at some point.
There's definitely
that's
some
what nature
passionate,
does.
Yeah. It's a bit of a weird trailer to be looking at because, we have so little information about the film. I'm sure people who've read the best-selling book will pick more out of the trailer than we were able to. But to be honest, it just looks compelling. It looks interesting and obviously with the pedigree of Ex Machina, which I hear is very good. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe we'll do it one week. Who knows?
Yep.
You have the sense that it might actually be an entertaining film.
Yeah, it has a sort of a style similar to, I want to say Arrival, but much more grim, much darker in tone and very spooky.
How do you think they're going to fuck up the film, though? It looks great. It looks great in the trailer. What do you reckon is going to be in the film which makes it just an unwatchable mess?
Al Gore will cameo at some point and talk about how it's all climate change's fault.
It's Annihilation, a very, very inconvenient truth.
Yeah, look, if we're going to go with that, then it's probably related to Geostorm from from the last podcast.
We'll find out soon that it's produced by Roland Emmerich, and it's really just another
just someone who was on set on Independence Day.
Yeah, it's the guy who took the producer of Independence Day for a walk around the studio. Now from the executive producer of Geostorm of Independence Day.
It's the film Annihilation, based on the book The Day the Earth Did Stuff that isn't the same as yesterday.
It's interesting. I still, as much as you like that, I think it has a bit of a Princess Mononoke vibe to it that I can see.
I got that too, yeah.
So, I don't want to criticize
We're
it.
not going to make too much fun of this film because it looks... It
looks worthwhile. Yeah. Again, we do This Week in Trailers with... and we've been doing, for 4 weeks? Obviously, none of the films we've had a look at have had a chance to be released yet. No. So, there's a good chance that some of them will be horrible, some of them will be good.
Yep.
I guess only time will tell.
Which camp are we putting Geostorm into?
Geostorm is going to be a rocket ride to insanity. It's going to be fantastic.
Going to be great. Box office success. The second trailer we watched was a Netflix original film called Bright.
Yeah, so I suppose we can't expect all of these to be cinematic releases. The landscape of movie releases is changing, and we obviously have Netflix as a big contender for their own original films. And this one is the film, as you mentioned, Bright, with Will Smith.
Yeah. And not his son either.
No, first time in a while he's been on screen.
None of his family
Jaden.
members are anywhere to be seen in this
too
film.
busy on Twitter making
probably
incredibly bizarre remarks.
Yep, and the other one's making music.
Yeah, she whips her hair back and forth.
She does.
So Joel Edgerton in this one as well, which... Is it Joel Edgerton? It was one of the Edgertons.
It's an Edgerton.
An Edgerton.
Yep.
Completely unrecognizable because he's an orc or a goblin or something like this.
Yeah, so we should probably explain, if you haven't seen this trailer, go and see it because it's interesting and I don't know what to think about it, but it's set in what looks like contemporary LA.
Yeah.
Will Smith plays a kind of grizzled cop. But it's a world where elves, orcs, and other magical
fairies,
creatures exist.
And I mean, we don't really get a sense if they've always existed in this world or whether it's a reasonably recent revelation that they do exist and the period of coexistence is a struggle. A bit District 9-ish, I kind of felt like. Yeah. But done in such a way that it feels real. It feels like a cop story. It's I think the guy who directed it directed End of Watch.
He did.
It feels very much like it's training day, cop car, cop buddies driving around, but with this huge level of grit and tension that you wouldn't expect in a film that deals so blatantly with these fantastical elements.
And what else did he direct?
I actually don't remember.
You don't remember?
No. I remember it coming up and going, oh no. But what was it coming?
Well, Will Smith was in it. It's related to the DC world.
He directed Suicide Squad.
Yes.
The
David Ayer, I think his name is.
That was... That's all right. Let's
move on. Anyway, the trailer looks... I personally, as I said, I don't know how to think. Well, that came out wrong. I don't know what to think about this one. Because it's a really bizarre kind of concept. This feels like a high intensity, very dramatic cop drama.
It has these really strong overtones of racism and acceptance and all these very interesting hot button topics that you wouldn't expect to be dealt with in a film like this.
Yeah.
But as an allegory, is a really interesting way of talking about racism by using, the partnership of Will Smith and an orc.
Yeah, and Will Smith is playing a human, I should also remark. And it's really odd because you see shots of elves in suits and business attire going about their day. Joel Edgerton, as mentioned, is unrecognizable in the prosthetics that he's got on, and he's also in full police gear as well. I've never seen anything like this. Like, I've never seen a blend of, I guess, the world that we recognize as our own and this very, very much a high concept, high fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, the only times I've ever seen it done, it's always set in a distant future.
Yeah,
where technology is the allegory or the parallel with magic.
Yeah.
And that way you can play it out. But in this one, it's very much a contemporary setting.
Yeah.
With this sort of fantasy overlay, and not a fantasy overlay, which is a world which is hidden from view, which again is done in these urban fantasy books. This is very much, it is in your face.
It's out there,
and having to deal with it is a problem. Now, the main crux of the story is that they discover a magic wand which has the ability to grant wishes, and then all of a sudden you have this confluence of people who want this incredibly powerful device, trying to murder and steal, and obviously that's where the conflict of the film comes from. I'm actually quite excited about it. It ticks so many of the boxes that I like that I really hope it's done well.
That's my kind of hope too, because I can't tell from this trailer what it's going to be like. It's the kind of concept that it sort of skates on the edge of being absolutely amazing and compelling, or utterly ridiculous and stupid in every possible way. So Netflix, guys,
has Netflix done? I mean, the pedigree of films that I've seen of Netflix have been all the Adam Sandler, The Hateful Eight.
Yeah.
Kevin James is actually a spy. Was like Confessions of a Real Life. I can't remember.
Sure, whatever.
Just like the original films that they churn out are poor.
Yeah, and I was having this discussion the other day with a friend talking about when Netflix revives an old TV show of some kind. I can't think of a single example of one that's done really well or is actually any good.
So the first one they did was Arrested Development. I don't really want to talk about season 4 because I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
Did they do Fuller House?
They did Fuller House, which no one liked. They're doing...
They did Daredevil, and not saying it's a reworking of an old TV show, but there was the Ben Affleck film.
Yeah, but...
and the first season of Daredevil, which is the only one that I've watched, was kind of incredible.
I don't think that counts. I think it needs to be sort of a direct continuation or set in the same if they're in the same universe as a previous version or previous incarnation. And yeah, I couldn't think of anything that they've done that's been any good. And yet, we all love Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, they've done Stranger Things. They did. Yeah. I'm not sure if Making a Murderer was a Netflix original, but definitely debuted on that. They have a good pedigree when you look at the cream of the crop, but when you sort of like scrape off the cream and look underneath, there seems to be a bit of curdled milk.
Yeah.
So you never know. This could be one or the other. The Will Smith Bright could be the cream that rises to the top or the curdled milk beneath. And I feel as though it's not going to fit in between, because I think it can really only be one or the other.
Yeah. So. Well, we'll see. I don't know when it comes out. Watch the trailer.
December, I think it said, maybe.
Oh, really? Okay.
So not too far away.
Who knows? It may appear on an episode of this podcast, but maybe not for reasons that you may be thinking.
All right.
Or maybe it will.
So, speaking of segues...
Yes.
Speaking of supernatural blended with urban environments...
Ooh, in the real world?
Yes.
Yeah.
2016 Ghostbusters is the film that we watched this week, and this was a suggestion from you, AJ. I did actually already watch this film last year when it was released on Blu-ray, not at the movies, and
I hadn't seen it
at all. And after the debacle, which was last week's Pirates of the Caribbean, I mean, I'm going to apologize to all of our listeners out there. We spent an hour kind of whinging about how bad that film was, because it was just a bad film. Like, it was really bad. And normally we do try and make a few more jokes in there and have a few more sort of like
we needed
grounds that we can play around with.
Yeah.
So we decided that, this week we'll choose a film which was reasonably well critically received.
Yeah.
It should be a little bit more enjoyable and have a bit more fun watching it.
Solid 75% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, something like 7.3 on IMDb or something around those lines.
That's not bad. That's
pretty solid for what is ostensibly a comedy. So
particularly after all the, and I suppose we should reference this at the top, the controversy that came out when the casting for that film was announced. Which was stupid. I mean, look, I'll put it out there now. That controversy was ridiculous.
The controversy you're talking about is that it was going to be an all-female reboot of Ghostbusters. And I mean, there was always probably going to be some backlash when you hear that a studio is remaking such an iconic film as Ghostbusters. But then that it was going to be an all-female reboot, people were just like, oh, you can't do that. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No.
I kind of feel like making it an all-female reboot is almost like pushing it too far. I mean, not too far in that I kind of feel like any film, you should be able to write a script and take any character and flip a coin, and that character should be able to be played by a man or a woman. If the film's written well, then it doesn't matter what the gender of any of the roles should be. They're really just people acting and behaving in an environment. It shouldn't matter, like if you're what was going to be a lead female and a lead male both happen to be lead males, you still play it out. They can still have the same romantic interests. They there shouldn't be any it shouldn't be noteworthy whether a character is a male or a female.
Gender doesn't make any difference.
It should be arbitrary. But like, obviously when you go, well, instead of making it arbitrary, we're going to push completely the other way and make it all female, I think it is actually making a statement. And that's why they've done it. They've done it to make a statement. Just go, well, all the best roles or all the high profile roles are filled by men. Let's do something that's all female. And I think what we should have is somewhere in the middle where it doesn't matter one way or the other. Obviously, because we're so skewed on one side of the table at the moment, pushing the envelope all the way to the other side and making something that is like completely gender imbalanced in the other side is the way to go, to actually bring it to the forefront and make it a topic of conversation, which is what they've done.
Because I could almost argue that the 1984 original could be done by a mixed cast.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and you can sort of say Bill Murray's character in that is a little bit, well, he is a bit of a sleaze in it.
He's a chauvinist
and he's
in a lot of moments as well.
But the rest of the cast, really,
it doesn't
really matter.
And And not saying that women can't be chauvinist pigs as well. Like, I mean, equal rights for all.
Yeah, and there's some odd moments in this film.
In this one where Kristen Wiig
doesn't really address any imbalance at all. It just makes it worse.
Yes.
But anyway, let's not quite get into that.
So tell me, AJ.
Yes.
How do you feel about this film? How was your overall experience watching Ghostbusters?
Should we race? I think we need a new rating system, right? So last week, I'm pretty sure I mentioned on the podcast that it was, so far, 3 episodes in, the worst film we'd watched. And I believe we brought up the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as well.
Right.
So I propose a new rating system based on Crystal Skull or Dead Men Tell No Tales.
Right. I mean, we could have a leaderboard. Like, actually have every film that we have, or we might put up somewhere on a website, ranked from top to bottom. And every week, obviously, a new film will slot in there somewhere.
Yep.
And we can go, does this sit between, The Lost World and Dead Men Tell, or does it fit up or above or below? So, we only have 3 on the board so far.
Well, we have 3, and also Crystal Skull is
Crystal Skull is the unaired pilot that we might go to say.
We might, if we're desperate one day and we really hate ourselves, we might watch that and do an episode on it, but let's hope it never comes to that. When you have to pause the film to go outside and throw a ball around because you're that angry and that bored by a film, you know it's never going to end well. This is far worse than Pirates 5. I'm sorry. I hated it. Nothing about it was redeeming. One thing was redeeming about it. The visual effects. The style of the ghosts and the effects from the proton packs, I really liked.
Do we want to start with the one redeeming feature? Because if we do, there's a lot of muck to get through. We will. Okay, so I think that is actually a really good place to start because, as you mentioned, the visual effects are astounding. Like the first ghost that you see in the mansion looks beautiful. There's a nice sort of flowingness to the material, a glow to it, the overlay of the ribs underneath the dress.
Yeah.
It's composed well within the live action and what's CG. Looks fantastic, and it really kind of just stays the course from there. Normally you see like 1 or 2 really good special effects shots at the start of the film, and then they don't spend as much money on the other ones, but for the most part, the rest of the ghosts and the apparitions look fantastic. There's these moments where there's mirrors all around this room, and behind the mirrors are people like glowing green spectral creatures pushing against the glass, and it looks really good. Like I think we discussed it. It's probably done with actual people in suits, blended with some sort of computer graphics, which are then composited into the mirrors, and the effects look great. There's a few really bad special effects shots.
There's definitely some bad special effects shots, but I think what we're trying to say is,
for the most part, the design and the aesthetics behind all of the special effects is kind of
the art direction.
Really well done.
It's beautifully done. It deserves to be in a better film.
Yeah,
for sure.
And even you mentioned the proton packs and the design of the costumes there, which are practical props. Also, like,
because it's sort of one of those things, and we happen upon this because this film makes a lot of references to the original in very, very unsubtle ways. But the design of the proton packs and the beam that they generate, and even the design of the ghosts, do recall the original film, but are also their own thing. And I think that's a great thing to have, rather than all the other references which just blatantly say, hey, remember that thing you liked back in 84? Well, we're doing it here too, for no reason. Have a look at the art direction of Ghostbusters, because it's really good.
All right, so we tried something last week which didn't quite work because we went off on a lot of tangents, but it was the 2-minute recap.
Yeah, but there's a reason why that didn't work last week.
Because the structure of Pirates jumped all over the place, that it was impossible to tell a coherent recap of the plot of the film.
Yeah.
Do you reckon you can do this in 2 minutes?
I can't.
Or would you like me to give it a crack this week?
I'm a rambling mess. I would like you to give it a crack.
All right,
here we go. And your time starts now.
So we start off with an apparition in a house. It's a ghost that attacks Zach Woods. I love Zach Woods. He's great in the film. We're introduced to the character of Kristen Wiig, who is trying to make a name for herself as a reputable physicist. She's got a great big meeting where she's presenting to a class, and it could be her step up in the world. Unbeknownst to her, Melissa McCarthy, who 10 years ago or way back in their past, they were a team who investigated the paranormal. They published a book together, and now the book is surfacing. It's ruining Kristen Wiig's career because she's trying to be serious. She goes to confront Melissa McCarthy. They then go off onto a chase and see a ghost. Kristen Wiig sees the ghost, and she's like, I see a ghost, I believe in ghosts. It goes on YouTube. Her career's ruined. Melissa McCarthy's career's ruined. And suddenly they're at square one, and they start a business to investigate the paranormal. Paranormal events are happening all around New York. We learn that this is because this one character is leaving these electronic devices around, which are calling forth spirits. The team assembles, which has Kate McKinnon as a wacky scientist and Leslie Jones as a ticket booth operator in a subway who gets sort of jumps in for no apparent reason to the group. She has a weird knowledge of the history of New York, which doesn't really play a hand in the film so much, which is kind of a weird affectation. They hire an incredibly good-looking Chris Hemsworth to be their receptionist, but who is incredibly dopey. And then the main crux of the film is that every time they save the city from a ghost, the mayor and his department work very hard to discredit the ghost as being true and say, why are you being fraudulent about this? Until finally, in the big scene where the guy who's been releasing devices all around the city opens up a Nexus portal into the spirit world to break down the barrier and allow spirits to enter our world so he can be all powerful. They drive the Ecto-1 into the portal, blow it up, and seal the hole and save the day, and everyone loves them because the Ghostbusters saved New York.
Great. That was just over 2 minutes, but that's fine. Now, if that plot sounds eerily familiar but mostly very vaguely rambling, let me rephrase that. If that plot sounds somewhat familiar, it's because it's basically a retelling of the 1984 film.
Exactly.
And it even shows that at the end. There's a credit note that says based on the 1984 film by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis.
So, I mean, this is an interesting point of conversation which I'd like to touch on, and it's how Hollywood does reboots and how they go about taking an existing intellectual property and rebranding it or recasting it or whatever. So, in this one, which really kind of annoyed me, it is in an independent world from the world of Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Like, it's taken the name Ghostbusters, it's taken the concept of Ghostbusters, but just said, we have pretty much nothing to do with the events that happened in 1984 and 1988, I think the second one was. So the world is not aware of ghosts, the world is not aware of Ghostbusters, and so everything that they're doing is new and fresh. And I get that as a reboot strategy, but what it does for the film is it gives the film a target to hit midway through the film, which is we need 4 people to have come together with scientific equipment whose sole purpose is to go around busting ghosts. They need to be called the Ghostbusters. They need to have a branded logo of a ghost in a red circle with a line through it. And they need to drive a wacky looking station wagon with flashing lights on the top.
Lights
and because they're put in these strict parameters of what has to happen to hit the notes which we know from the Ghostbusters. I think you mentioned earlier, you hit these really weird moments, which are these weird fan service moments. There's one where there's a graffiti artist in a subway station who is drawing a picture of a ghost, and Leslie Jones says, we don't want no pictures of ghosts, and he's like, okay, and then he draws a circle around it with a line through it, and it's like, oh, that's going to be our logo. And again, Leslie Jones's uncle is a mortician, so he has a hearse, and he says they can borrow a hearse, which is where they get that sort of station wagon looking Ecto-1 Ghostmobile. And so it just becomes this sort of strange series of events which are heading towards a target that you know they're trying to hit, rather than the story unraveling as it naturally would.
Nothing naturally progresses along plot points in this film. It's just they've got a bunch of components and they need to string them together. And all those components have been mined from the original film.
Yeah.
And all they've done is written not even written half the time. I'm assuming that most of the film was improvised.
Let's not get into the improv comedy because that's another massive topic of conversation which we need to have later on, which is a flaw with the film.
Yes, but they've got all these milestone moments and all they've done is written some really tenuous and very weak bridging segments to connect them all together.
Yeah, I think what I would have rather had seen was a film set in the same world as the 1984 Ghostbusters, where potentially...
So like a Ghostbusters 3.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily a Ghostbusters 3, but you can set it in a world where potentially New York has really kind of forgotten about the threat of ghosts because it's been 20 years since the last outbreak and it's sort of faded from people's memory. You might even have something which is like one of the effects of what's going on is people have forgotten about this thing and a new group of people need to rise up to bring it to the forefront.
Well, not even bring it to the forefront. Maybe the threat starts reappearing again. This once dormant threat has now come back out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's someone else's job to take over the mantle because it's been too long. And I mean, that's one way of doing a reboot, and I get that they have chose to do it a different way, and that's, I mean, generally fine. But if you're going to sort of whitewash what's already there and build your own thing upon it, there's no need to hit so many of those fan service moments, which really kind of railroad you into taking a film in a certain direction. There's so many ways that you could have done it differently without telling the same story, without hitting the same beats.
Yeah, and I think it's a weird thing for the audience, and I think I mentioned this to you while we were watching it. Seeing all these direct references to the original film. So there's a point where they visit the firehouse that they used as a headquarters in the original. There was the logo bit in the subway, as you mentioned, and various other...
Slimer shows up.
The original cast is also in there playing other characters.
Scattered.
And obviously...
Yeah, I mean, that's another way of saying that world doesn't exist. Because if Bill Murray can show up and play some incredulous professor who doesn't believe that what these people are doing is true, it means that, well, Bill Murray then doesn't exist as
that's right,
the character from the original film.
And
Dan Aykroyd shows up as a taxi driver. He was never a Ghostbuster 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And Ernie Hudson shows up as the uncle of Leslie Jones, who's a mortician, and it's just...
Yeah, and Annie Potts
as the receptionist.
As a receptionist in a hotel.
I think Sigourney Weaver's even in the post-credit scenes, which is a weird place for her to make her appearance.
And Rick Moranis was at home making an album. He's not in the film.
No, I really think he lives like a quiet life in like a mountain village somewhere.
Rick Moranis. Anyway, I find that these kind of references really pull you out of the film. It's sort of like seeing... It's that annoying thing. It's the Stan Lee effect. So every Marvel film and every comic book that he's been a part of that's been turned into a film, he'll appear in it playing some kind of wacky character for a moment, and it's just a little Easter egg for the fans. So, and I mean, they pull you out of it because this world that the film has constructed that where these things are happening then asks you to... then bashes you over the head with the knowledge that Stan Lee is in it. Right? Now, that's fine in the context of a Marvel film where that only happens for like 5 seconds.
Yeah, 5 seconds every film.
In the middle of a 2-hour film. But in Ghostbusters, it happens constantly.
So but you can see the story driving towards these moments as well.
Yeah.
Which is, it's like it's dragging them in. It's dragging the story along rather than these sort of like little cutaway bits and pieces.
Yeah, and it just... Or like little hidden Easter eggs sort of in the background that a very observant fan might be able to see and sort of see where they've dropped in a little cute reference. But these are very blatant, and all they serve to do is to pull you out of the world and the story that this film is presenting to you and bash you over the head and say, hey, remember that 1984 film that you enjoyed so much? Remember that thing that was just a massive part of your childhood? Well, here's a thing that was... in it. Enjoy.
So, I mean, while they create these really awkward moments within the film, which only really serve to drag you out of it and sort of derail what could be quite a clean telling of a very sort of if they're just retelling Ghostbusters, there's a pretty linear progression that they can make there for that story, but instead they drag you out. But it's still not the worst part about the film, and you touched on this earlier. It's the comedy that is the worst part of this film. And I mean, the 1984 Ghostbusters at its core was sort of a supernatural urban action adventure kind of thing. And it happened to be written by comedians, and it happened to have comedians in it. And they definitely imbued a sense of comedy into the film, but it wasn't a comedy.
It's not a comedy, no.
This quite clearly is a comedy. It's so clear that it's a comedy that every single bit character role is either played by an ex-Saturday Night Live alum, or it's played by a stand-up comedian or someone or one of Paul Feig's friends from some comedy show. And you can never get a sense that the world is real.
No.
Because the FBI agents are comedians, the valets are comedians.
The dean of Melissa McCarthy's school is Jimmy Fallon's sidekick. And it's at no point do you think that these are actually characters in a film.
And they all have to do their own little bit. So there's a bit where the FBI agent goes to open the car and it's locked and he has to tap on the window, and then as he's driving away does the thing where he points to his eyes and then points to their eyes as I'm watching you. I'm like, you're supposed to be an FBI agent. You're not supposed to be like a goofy side character. You're not supposed to do things, these light-hearted moments. The only way you would do that is if you didn't exist in the real world as a person who held this position or had this job.
Yeah, and it's odd. I mean, let's talk about improv for a sec, right? So you would assume that this is that kind of same improv style comedy that Judd Apatow films have sort of become known for, and Paul Feig, and that sort of zany, wacky, dialogue-heavy based improvised humor where they just make up something on the spot.
Yeah, they have a rough outline of how a scene's going to go, and they just say to either Melissa McCarthy or Kristen Wiig or Will Ferrell,
if he's around.
I think we did the bit last week where Will Ferrell shows up and he wants the script, and they say, no, just make something up.
Fine, just make it up.
Yeah, so it feels very much like that sort of thing. It's just like, just say something random. Just say something a bit stupid or funny or silly, and we'll cut that scene around that goof or gag that you're doing and try and have it some semblance of...
But it's not even how improv is supposed to work.
No.
Like, improv is meant to be, you establish a character and you play around within that character and within that character's personality and how they would react to the world around them. You don't just randomly spout stuff that might be funny. It might be a funny line. It might be a funny fart joke, or it might be
fart jokes and dick jokes, and it's so
like, let's make a crack about someone's virginity or how they live in their mother's basement or something, because that's funny and that's improvised. Like, we didn't write that down. Oh, look at us on the set being all funny and random. No, you establish a character. And then the humor comes out of placing that character in odd situations, which is essentially how Ghostbusters 1, the original, worked.
Whereas there's several moments in this film, and I'll take the example, Kristen Wiig's character is having an argument with her boyfriend, and they're essentially breaking up. And it's almost the first moment in the movie where you get a sense that this relationship is real, because beforehand it's these weird sort of quirky moments where she goes to kiss him on the lips and he kind of like turns away and says hello to someone that he hasn't seen before, as if to say, yeah, this is a dysfunctional relationship.
Yep.
And they finally put these characters in a situation where they're having a meaningful talk about how he treated her and how she hid her past from him. And you're about to get into this moment where these characters are actually going to have an argument, and instead... They cut away to Leslie Jones and Melissa McCarthy talking about how they think he dances.
Yeah, and how hot he is.
Yeah, and he's just like, I bet he doesn't even move his hips. I bet it's all... And she's just like, nah, he can pop and lock. And it's like, there's this improvised scene where, the scriptwriters didn't do it. They just said to these two funny people, just have a conversation about mocking this other character and see where it goes.
Yep.
And instead of playing out a scene which has real character development and emotion to it, they cut away to these improvised scene of these people just talking garbage. And that's... They do it so many times. Again,
they do.
The first time we meet Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig comes in angry at her for ruining her career. Melissa McCarthy's like, you abandoned our dream of hunting ghosts. There's supposed to be real tension. And the scene is about wonton soup. Like a Chinese delivery fast food delivery person comes in and brings her soup and it doesn't have enough wontons in it, and they talk about that for 5 minutes of the scene.
Yeah.
Instead of establishing character and relationship and tension which they can bring into other scenes in the film, they go off and do these stupid gags that have nothing to do with anything.
I need to go back to that scene with Kristen Wiig and her boyfriend as well, because at its most mildest, it's sort of like, well, that you've taken away a dramatic moment. At its worst, though, it actually really impacts the value of Kristen Wiig's character in that film, because the argument starts with her being in the right. So she gets fired from her university job, and while she's walking out of the place with her box of stuff, her boyfriend completely ignores her while she's going through this very humiliating walk to the exit. And so she comes at that argument initially from a position of strength, right? Her boyfriend has done something pretty crappy. So not only do they not show any of that fight to give her character a sense of power and a sense of being and give her dramatic purpose, they cut away to do some crappy gags. When they've done that, the argument is essentially finished. And then there's this really stupid moment where she turns to go back to the car and the crew starts driving off without her, and she tries to get in and they drive off, and then they stop, and then she tries to get in again and then they stop. And it's like, so what you've done there is you've taken her character from being someone who is strong, someone who's confronting a problem, and just turned her into nothing. You've defeated her. You've taken away her agency at that point. You've given her no positive attributes. You've just turned her into a laughingstock for no reason. And it's why, and from an audience point of view, why would I now care about her? You've not shown me anything.
So what it really comes down to is that the characters that are presented can't exist in the real world as they are.
No.
They're too stupid, they're too silly, they act in childish ways which don't make any sense to the context of what's going on.
Yep.
You mentioned Kristen Wiig getting fired in this humiliating moment where she has to carry a box full of her things out of her office.
Yep.
And as she's walking down the corridor, she makes these little quips to everyone. It's like, oh, I'm just taking my plant for a walk, it needs some fresh air.
Yep.
Oh, I like lifting all my stuff. Occasionally I just take everything out of my office and back again, and it's good exercise. And like, no one in this situation, which is quite a humiliating situation, would act in this way, except as you pointed out during this film, which
So,
I think
hang on.
is...
Before we do, let's introduce a new segment to this podcast, which we're going to call Fan Stories.
Fan theories?
Fan theories.
I think this is a little different to a fan theory.
Is
I think
it?
this is a recontextualization, but I like
Well, that's not a very
the
good
fan
name.
theory. I will call it a fan theory. I think that works quite well because we'll be doing fan theories in the future for other films.
Yep.
So AJ, what is your fan theory for Ghostbusters?
My fan theory. Well, my fan theory is that the main Ghostbusters team are actually 10-year-old kids.
10-year-old girls.
If you think about the entire film, with the context that these characters are 10 years old, the film is amazing.
So the events happened to 10-year-old girls, and they are retelling the story
To a bunch,
embellishing the details, which is why they appear as older and more mature than they are.
Yep.
But in actual fact, these are
they're 10-year-olds.
children.
Yep.
And it
explains so much.
Explains why they act like children in these scenarios, which makes no sense. It explains their behavior, their lack of actual character development or relationship, because you can go from a fight to being best friends with people in a matter of seconds.
That's what 10-year-olds do. It also explains how all the other people that they encounter
treat them.
They treat them like children. So Andy Garcia is in this film for some reason.
He hasn't quite become the president yet that we know from Geostorm.
But he was mayor of New York.
Exactly.
Right?
You've got to work your way up. You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So he's mayor of New York, and he talks down to them when they're talking about how ghosts are a thing and New York is on the verge of a cataclysmic event, and he's like, oh, it's fine, we're looking after it, the government's here and they're sorting it all out. Exactly the way that an adult would talk down to a 10-year-old child. So, and even the visual effects, right? So the visual effects in this film are very bright, very colourful,
very exaggerated,
super saturated, exaggerated, and the design of them is almost how a child might describe a ghost if they had never seen one before. they're see-through. You can see the skeletons, and it's kind of gross, and they're all wispy.
There's icky, gooey slime that slimes on me all the time. There's even a moment where they're recounting how they met, and you see a photograph of both Melissa McCarthy's character and Kristen Wiig's character as children, and I kind of feel as though that's who they are. They are the people who are actually going through these events. And to make it, believable, they'd have to be incredibly intelligent people to come up with the...
Yeah, but are they?
Just to come up with the technology behind the fighting of the ghosts.
But what if we assume that these 10-year-olds are just retelling a story that they've made up, right? Like it's a campfire story, or it's like, they've gone away to camp. It's summer camp. These 4 girls have gone away to camp. They're all friends, but they don't know anyone else at this camp. And so to get in with the cool crowd around the campfire, they're telling this story of this time they went to New York, and we totally took out an army of ghosts. And then they're just they freewheel it from there. So they're just constantly coming up with, and then we went down to the subway, and this prisoner ghost came out, and he had chains everywhere, and then there was a subway train coming towards us, and we used our special weapons, but they got destroyed by the subway, because we were like, oh my god, we're gonna die, but we got pulled out just in time by it was crazy.
It is. If the only way that you can, I think, watch this film and have these characters believable in the universe is to recontextualize them as children.
All you need to fix this film is a couple of scenes intersliced throughout where they cut to that campfire, and there's 4 10-year-old girls telling the story. And it would be perfect, right? It would explain everything. All the stupidity of this film would be absolutely
just the
fine.
Dancing montages. Is there anything other than a 12-year-old girl who would have put 4 separate dancing montages in this film? Yeah. And speaking of the dancing montage, we're going to go back to something that showed up in The Mummy, and there's something that showed up in Pirates of the Caribbean, which is just magical powers. And so Chris Hemsworth's character gets possessed at one stage by the antagonist ghost, and suddenly has a bizarre assortment of magic powers, including being able to mind control an entire army to essentially do the Michael Jackson Thriller dance.
Well, they were doing Staying Alive, weren't they? That was a Bee Gees song.
Yeah, but I think they had that, the arms in the air.
Kind of
and they were frozen there in that stance, and it's just sort of no ghost had this power before, and if you have the power to mind control people, why are you not mind controlling the Ghostbusters to freeze in place you've done with everyone else? It just becomes this bizarre assortment of powers that they give characters to make scenes work, which if the character actually had those powers would just defeat the good guys in a snap of the fingers.
Exactly.
It is absolutely crazy that this keeps showing up in films time and time again, and the range of powers that he has as a ghost are difficult enough to overcome anyway. The only reason to have the mind control powers is to do another dance scene, dance sequence montage. They have one that they move into the office, and I think it's like a Belle Biv DeVoe thing where Kate McKinnon's sort of dancing around with blowtorches and setting things on fire. They have another one where Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig are recounting the story of how they met, and they're doing a dance routine for the presentation.
It's a high school project.
They have another one after they captured their first ghost for the first time, and it's a great big celebration of them sort of dancing around. And then they do another one at the end, which is the mind control thing. We've had enough dance montage. You don't need to give the ghost another magic power just so you can throw another one in there. It doesn't make any sense.
And this is the whole comedy bit. This is why this film feels more like a comedy than anything else, because the original Ghostbusters feels like it happens in our world. So people react responsibly, or people react in a way that you might assume people might react in a similar situation. So there's panic in the streets. There's this plucky group of 4 Ghostbusters who slightly in over their heads a lot of the time. There's the proliferation of the news that ghosts exist and are part of the world happens naturally, and because people are seeing it for themselves. And that's not in this film at all. It's just a bunch of none of the people in this film feel like they exist in the real world.
It's almost the opposite of, instead of panic in the streets and the proliferation of the news, it is the opposite. It's the people living in constant denial of what is real is actually there, and constantly trying to prove that these videos which have been shot and uploaded to YouTube are fake. And I get, from a story point of view, that's an interesting take on it. It's like, instead of the Ghostbusters being revered, they are constantly up against people who are calling them fraudulent. And it's an interesting take on it, but I don't think they do any justice to that sort of side of the story.
Not even slightly. No.
Because there are literally thousands of witnesses, about 3/4 of the way through the film, before the big sort of cataclysmic event, who have seen ghosts, who have seen the things that they're doing, and yet they're constantly like being called frauds. It's like, you 4 people are making these stories up. It's like, yeah, but what about the hundreds of witnesses at the rock concert which saw this happen, or the dozens of people at the train station who saw this other ghost, or it just...
But it's the 10-year-old girl thing, right? Like, like the adults didn't believe us at all.
Exactly.
It's that, right? It's the trying to sort of give this group of characters, putting them in a position of putting them on a lower plateau than everyone else. And expecting the audience to give them sympathy because of it, or to identify with them because no one believes them. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't feel genuine at all.
So do you have any other fan theories about this? Because I had an idea.
Okay.
When Slimer gets ripped back into the portal.
Yep.
And is going through space, and you can quite clearly see there's a wormhole which is connecting 2 realities, right? 2 planes. I was like, what if that wormhole takes him back to 1984, and these 2 worlds exist? They are the 2 planes, and they're constantly sending ghosts from one side to the other, back in time, and that's the. I mean, what I'm trying to do is marry the 2 universes together.
So do you reckon they've sent through Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, and all those characters through?
Possibly, yeah. Just to try and make the female Ghostbusters think what they're doing is wrong, because the more ghosts that they send back through the portal,
the worse it is.
The worse it gets on that side.
Right.
So it's just, they're trying to send ghosts back and forth, and it's bouncing between these 2 worlds.
So okay. So after Ghostbusters 2, the Ghostbusters all got together and thought, we can't let this happen again, and we know that there's a portal to some other world, some other dimension, where these things are coming from, and it's actually leading to
an alternate reality, New York,
2016, and there's that works. And so the original Ghostbusters say, right, we have to just keep sending.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
a war between the worlds, because only one of those 2 worlds can survive, right? Yeah. One of those 2 worlds has to host the.
That's right.
The apparitions, and which one is it going to be?
Which one is it? So, and that means, so in Ghostbusters 2, isn't there a bit where, or am I thinking of Super Mario Brothers? I was almost certain there's a bit where, like, the world in the second Ghostbusters starts to become more like the parallel universe where the ghosts are coming from.
I in my head, I'm playing out, I think in the Ghostbusters animated series, there's a bit where Slimer gets sucked into the storage area where all the ghosts are kept, and he has to live in this sort of nether realm between the 2, and that's what's playing in my head.
Maybe it's not even that. Maybe the containment system contains the entire other reality. Right? So it's a weird kind of like nested universe idea. Do you remember that episode of Futurama where Farnsworth creates a box containing a parallel universe, and then the universe in there creates a box containing their universe?
I don't specifically.
Well, you do now. So he creates a cardboard box that contains an entire parallel universe with all these weird versions of themselves in it, and simultaneously they create a box containing the original universe as well. So
it's like an Ouroboros snake eating its own
tail.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe the 1984 Ghostbusters accidentally created a parallel universe where where Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy exist, and simultaneously in that universe They created the 1984 universe
really,
as well.
The only constant between those two universes, we do have Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, but is Slimer. Yeah. And Slimer exists as like a courier between the two worlds, going back and forth.
He bridges the world.
And actually brings up another segment that we're going to try and introduce this week, which is fun movie facts. And you actually brought up an actual fun movie fact about Slimer, which I wasn't aware.
Oh, yes. So Slimer is based on John Belushi.
It was specifically Bluto from Animal House.
Bluto from Animal House, yeah. So, and now Dan Aykroyd actually refers to Slimer as the ghost of John Belushi. So the design of Slimer is sort of meant to mirror Bluto from Animal House and obviously by extension Belushi. And
obviously Belushi died in 1982, which was and Ghostbusters was 1984. So there's that sort of like, and obviously. Having Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and those original Saturday Night Live cast members being such a close-knit group, it's sort of becomes almost an homage to their friend through this character, who again is like the only ghost that they don't try and like leave in that containment unit. They let him sort of like run around.
He becomes a kind of friend. In the animated series, he's like a friend.
Exactly. And he just gets into silly
and he helps
shenanigans.
Yeah.
Which is almost like being a blood traitor to the other ghosts.
Yeah,
like,
a little bit.
He's the what is it in Inglourious Bastards where you have the one character, the Jew hunter, or just like almost like he's the one guy who's betraying his own species to lock away and eradicate all the other ghosts.
So what's his story then?
Slimer's story? I don't know, because he appears as a giant bag of goo, whereas I think in the original Ghostbusters, a lot of the other ghosts are anthropomorphic in nature. They are humanoid.
Some are humanoid and some are... I don't know.
There's a skeleton at one stage who's a taxi driver, I think.
Well, there is. There's it's a corpse. It's like an actual corpse that's a taxi driver. And I'm like, the concept of ghosts in these films don't really make any sense because they become...
Fun fact, again, another fun movie fact, that corpse of the taxi driver from Ghostbusters is Dan Aykroyd, the taxi driver from the 2016 one in this Ouroboros cyclical universe.
Right. So Dan Aykroyd died in the...
Yeah, it's actually his skeleton.
It's actually
they sent it back in time to be used as a prop.
Oh my gosh.
20 years before his death.
That's... Wow. Oh, of course, that makes sense.
It does. It's also like they do that a lot in Hamlet. Because they have alas poor Yorick and Hamlet is holding the skull. A lot of the times, that skull is actually the skull of the actor playing Hamlet in that production.
Okay.
And they use the bone time travel technology to send the skull back in time from the future after that actor has already died.
Bone time travel technology.
Yeah, exactly. It's where
the B triple tree.
Of course. I mean, you don't believe there's actually dinosaur fossils. That's
no.
From the past. They're actually dinosaurs from the future.
From the future.
With bone time travel technology.
Great.
They've come back from the future, but they overshot and they ended up a long time in the past.
I'm about to blow your mind here. So I'm certain that I mentioned Super Mario Brothers in this episode, talking about how...
I think we mentioned it also quite extensively in our first episode.
We mentioned it in number one. So what if Super Mario Brothers is the thread that links everything together?
I think we linked like 5 or 6 different cinematic universes in that one. I'm scared to link Ghostbusters into the same thing as well.
Don't be scared. Just let it happen. Let it happen, man.
It's all one big amorphous mess.
And it's all... And it's all Dennis Hopper's fault. And oh my gosh, I've forgotten the actor that played Mario.
Bob Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins, what a champion. But if we put Super Mario Brothers at the center of all known universes, and everything just revolves around it. So Super Mario Brothers is simultaneously the beginning and the end of all life and everything that's ever happened. I mean, do we count our own lives in that too, or is it just a cinematic thing?
Until the cinematic universe is inextricably linked with... I'm going to try again with that word. Inextricably. Linked with our own... I kind of feel as though I can't mentally link my world to that. I think I'd melt in a ball of existential crisis.
So that's a step too far. But we can unequivocally state that the Jurassic films, or Jurassic World at the very least, Dawn of the War of the Battle of the Planet of the Apes, What did we watch today? Ghostbusters.
I think, did we tie Free Willy into there as well at some point?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, because we talked about Barry Nibbles, right? So everything originated from Super Mario Brothers, which has a alternate dimension thing where there's a parallel New York inhabited by, instead of humans that have evolved from a common ancestor, a common primate ancestor, the alternate dimension in Super Mario Brothers has humans that have evolved from a common reptilian ancestor.
So, I mean, this begs the question.
Yep.
Do we have to link every future film that we watch back into Super Mario Brothers? I don't know. Or are we going to watch Super Mario Brothers next week? Maybe that will be next week's film.
It could be next week's film, yeah. Because it's truly a masterpiece. And it's far better than the one we just watched.
All right, so it's agreed that next week we'll be watching
Super Mario Brothers 1992, I think.
Somewhere around there.
John
Leguizamo.
Yep.
I suppose now that you say his name, I'm like, yeah, he looks like a Luigi, sure. They could have put him as Luigi.
They could have, and they did.
It's really kind of weird as well, because I'm fairly sure at the end of that film, Princess Peach shows up with like an assault rifle and
she
says,
does.
We're going to have to go make Super Mario Brothers 2, which just never happened.
No. Or did it? Maybe every film that is branched off from the Super Mario Brothers universe is Super Mario Brothers 2.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get some more data on this, because I mean, I believe there's an asteroid at some point. And
there is. It all revolves around a meteorite that split the dimensions into two.
I mean, they say two. It could be an infinite split of dimensions.
It could be, yeah. Oh, this is intense.
This is intense.
Now, wow. Okay.
All right. I mean, if we've decided on our film for next week, I think we might leave it there. Lots to think about with Ghostbusters. And again...
don't think about it too much.
We're going to have to, at some stage, watch a movie that we both want to watch. This is both actually good, but...
And is actually decent, because this film is horrible.
Yes.
It's bad. I can't, as much as... I'm not going to obviously discredit it because it cast 4 females as the leads. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I would have been quite happy to see it. But the film itself is awful.
Yeah, I mean, again, doing a similar thing is the Oceans reboot, right? So Oceans 8 or whatever they're doing is an all-female recasting of Oceans. And I think they are making a lot more effort with that to tie it back into the events, or at least the characters the George Clooney Oceans films.
Matt Damon is in Ocean's 8. I don't know to what capacity. And the one of the characters in Ocean's 8 is actually George Clooney's sister.
Okay, right.
So Danny Ocean's sister. So there is an actual family relationship there. Whether or not that actually ends up being any good remains to be seen. There's obviously no trailers yet. It will be a trailer on the show when it comes out. I am a massive fan of the Ocean's films, particularly the first.
The first one only for me. I think that's a trend where you say you're a fan of a film franchise, and I say, I'll just take the first one, and you can have the rest of them.
You're not greedy. Whereas exactly. I am very greedy. Is this the same for Star Wars with you? Do you only like the first?
I actually think the first, A New Hope, is the weakest of the original trilogy.
Really?
I grew up loving Jedi, but that's because, you don't notice the Ewoks when you're a 8-year-old kid. You just notice Luke Skywalker bouncing around with a lightsaber. So
true.
We don't really want to get too deep into Star Wars talk, so we might leave it here for this week.
It will get connected to Super Mario Brothers at some point.
I mean, is this the problem? We can never watch a film that we love, because we'll end up just tying the universe into Super Mario Brothers, and it'll be a fractured splinter of what its own creativity, because it's all tied into that one universe.
Yep.
All right, well, thanks very much for listening, guys. We've been Movie Film Studios. I'm Isaac.
And I'm AJ.
Roll credits.